Dear men and women of culture, the human mind can conjure up some very gruesome and fucked up shit, and I personally love it. Some of my favorite media are splatter and horror, but exploring the depths of human depravity is also fun. So when I heard about Cyan Brain, I was stoked. A side-scrolling horror game. Those can only go one of two ways, I thought, depending on your own, let's say, tastes and sensibilities. This will either be very good or very bad. The story starts with you waking up in a lab. Next to you, a corpse with an ID card. Your goal for now, escape the facility because the church has unleashed a bioweapon on the facility while you have been implanted with the fetus of a twin gods. But escape is not that simple. In your way stand such abominations as women with fucked up arms, women with mantis arms, women with lances for arms, and how else should it be but legally distinct facehuggers. Depending on when you die, you will find out what kind of horror eroge we are dealing with. It is the Guru type, which I have to say, thank God, because I could not deal with the alternative. Funny thing, each death is rather interestingly detailed. You see, in the left corner, you get a sort of damage report showing you where the fatalities occurred, if not clear already. But it also shows you where she has been seated. By the time you died, you will have already figured out that you have a gun and a knife, of which you are not gonna use the knife, ever. While it is a nice weapon in the way that it shortly stuns oncoming enemies if hit, the windup is either too long or not long enough, causing you to get hit yourself more often than not. The secondary is a pistol, your main weapon for most of the game. Not because you don't get any other ranged options or because they are bad, but because it has limitless ammo. A headshot does the most damage and has a low percentage chance to stun the enemy, same as the knife has. The only thing the knife has over the gun is, if you last hit with the knife, you get ammunition, but if you play conservatively and use the pistol most of the time, unless another gun is absolutely necessary for you to progress, you won't have any trouble. What the game doesn't tell you right away is that you can dodge, and I'm gonna rip the band-aid off clean and give you the real tutorial. You run in the direction you aim, so if an enemy gets too close, do not walk backwards while aiming at them. Aim in the opposite direction and just go. However, if you dodge, you have a few invincibility frames, which is very useful for the entirety of the game. Also, if you dodge underneath the door, you can get past the door faster. That's a nice time save. And for darker sections, you have a flashlight, but it has a battery life. If it runs out, the flashlight goes dark and replenishes its battery automatically. Heal whenever you can, because you'll almost never run out of heals. And remember how the game marketed itself as a horror side-scroller? That is factually wrong, because it is in reality a rhythm game. Horror describes any media that evokes the feeling of unease, fear or terror, meaning basically anything that makes your adrenaline skyrocket. While a rhythm game is defined as follows: a game in which the player has to match his inputs with the music. Ignoring the obvious with the invincibility frames, if you stop moving as soon as you hear the steps of an enemy, you will always only aggro one from off screen, meaning that during segments with multiple strong enemies, you will always just aggro one. And considering that the game has a lot of segments where music is entirely absent, I do believe that the tapping of fleshy naked feet on the cold metal floor can be seen as a form of music or rhythm. But if an encounter gets a bit too close for your liking, try to retreat behind a door, resetting the room but keeping the enemies dead and damaged. You might have noticed that there is not one frame that I have left uncensored, and that is a shame, but necessary, because there is barely a frame not shoving gore and female genitalia in the frame. Heck, I can't even show you the health indicator, because it shows female anatomy and I cannot guarantee that it doesn't break terms of service. And that is quite the shame. The animations are smooth, despite how clunky the game feels to play. Each death animation has a certain crunch to it, be it being literally fucked to death, or being squashed by a hydraulic press. I have winced and physically recalled multiple times while watching Higurashi and playing Corpse Party. But Cyan Brain is, at least in that regard, no lesser to them. Although, at least to me, it feels like there's something missing. Corpse Party explores the depths of human despair and depravity, while Higurashi is just unnerving enough to stick with you, which is why I regard it as the pinnacle of horror. Cyan Brain feels like violence for the sake of violence. There is no reason behind it, and while I agree that I might be reading too much into the other two, I have always been of the opinion that horror needs to stick with one to be effective. The first 10 minutes of Smile, for example, are the best horror I have seen in many years, but everything that followed was just boring jump scare galore. Same with the sequel. And that, although I believe that there is a core to Smile that speaks to the human nature, about trauma and how gruesome violence is detrimental to those who witness it. Cyan Brain has none of it. It is set in the far future. There is something going on with a cult and rituals, but it is too vague to be terrifying, and it just ends up saying a bunch of nothing. And that is fine, as long as it doesn't try to be a horror game, instead committing to being guru porn. Where was I going with this? Ah, right. Cyan Brain does what it does phenomenally, but it fails to stick the landing. I still remember the other series, but this one is no more than the gif of that girl that gets evaporated. You know the one. I have yet to talk about the Eroge aspect, and there is a good reason for it, because you will not see any erotic content if you don't die, or visit the memory after completing a level. But even if you die, it usually ends with your character dead, so the content is very graphic in nature, and at the same time, weirdly not graphic enough. Don't get me wrong, seeing worms crawl out of one's flesh is disgusting, and getting fucked enough that the juice comes back out on top is hilariously dumb. But it is neither horrific enough to discourage me from watching them, nor sexy enough to get me fired up and keep going. I'm a freak like that. So I imagine that for most people this is not even close to hitting the sweet spot, most likely discouraging them from ever thinking of it as sexy altogether. Cyan Brain for me is an easy 7 out of 10. The gameplay is good enough for those who like games like these. Its atmosphere is phenomenal and the animations are morbidly beautiful, but it fails to become truly iconic, and the handling is just a bit too clunky for my liking. It became rather monotone really fast, and morbid curiosity is a rather weak motivator. If you like the feel of Cyan Brain's atmosphere, but don't like the gameplay, maybe try Tepang. It is no Eroge, don't get me wrong, but it feels very much like Cyan Brain. And with that, thank you guys for watching. Do you guys agree with my take on horror, and do you guys like Guru, or are you firmly on the stance of no thank you? I would like to see your answers in the comments below.